everyone. Thank you for joining us for another edition of the Responsive Weekly Discussion. We're so grateful for everyone that's here. We will get started in just a few minutes. We want to make sure that we have enough time to let everybody come into the conversation space. We are excited because we have two special guests, Taylor Shanklin and Barbara O'Reilly, that will be joining us for today's conversation. So just hold tight for one more minute while we let everybody come on in, and then we will get started. While we're actually waiting, we might as well start using the chat. This is a discussion-driven environment, and so we'd love to hear where you're calling in from. So maybe just your state, and then how you're feeling on this Thursday in December. You know, is your stress high? Are you a 5, or are you hanging out and you're at a 1? We'd love to hear that. What's your level of stress as we head into end of year and fundraising? I know mine's probably at like a 4.5. based on the fact that I also broke my foot during Thanksgiving weekend. But I know many others are in different places, so we'd love to see that chat begin to work. Jackie is a 5, so that's a good starting point. Jackie has set the bar pretty high. Thanks, Jackie.
Jackie, we're here for you.
Yeah, at least you didn't put sick.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Right.
Jonathan from New Mexico is feeling a 3. That's pretty awesome. Kathy from Cleveland is a 3. Heidi said usually a 2, but today a 5. What's going on, Heidi? And then Stephen from Menlo Park is a 3. So we have some people that are pretty even keeled, which is great. Erin said she's wrapping up
ones, huh?
Yeah.
No ones yet, but Erin said she's wrapping up their first ever virtual festival of trees, and she's feeling fine.
Cool.
Heidi said COVID has just gotten her down. So gosh, Heidi, I feel for you. Definitely feel for you. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn over to Hillary Sutton, who's our content director here at Virtuous, and get us kicked off for today's conversation.
Yes, if you're just joining us, welcome to the Responsive Weekly. So excited to have you with us. Thank you for taking the time. Today, we're going to be talking about old school fundraising versus new school, how to create meaningful donor relationships in a digital world. So I'd love for you to hop in the chat and give us an idea of where you feel like your organization is right now. Do you feel like you lean heavily on the new school, the digital, the latest and greatest technology when it comes to the fundraising for your organization? Or are you kind of old school? Do you love your direct mail? Do you love your picking up the phone and calling and all of that? So let us know sort of where you are. Let's say if we want to do like a sliding scale of like 1 is old school all the way and 5 is new school all the way. Let us know where you are. We'd love to find out where you are right now. I'm so excited to welcome our guests today, Barbara O'Reilly and Taylor Shanklin. Barbara is the founder of Windmill Hill Consulting, and Taylor is the VP of Growth at Firefly Partners. And I'm just so thrilled to hear your wisdom and what you have to share with us today. So let's rock and roll.
Cool. Barbara, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that has really sort of struck me as we have been moving through this year, but certainly I think this year has really heightened and amplified the fact that, you know, we're in a hyper connected world and our donors are offline and online. And you know, we've known about this. This is not rocket science. This is not like breaking news, but in this year, this has sort of broken down all the silos that we walked into 2020 with, you know, between digital and direct marketing and face-to-face and mid-level, annual, major gifts, corporate foundations, sort of the list goes on. And so one of the things that we've got to really think about in fundraising through the rest of COVID and post-COVID is that our supporters, it isn't just which channel or how they're giving. It has to be this whole experience. And it has to be in the mindset of this hyper-connectivity that we all find ourselves in. Taylor, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say it's an interesting concept. And Barbara and I have been talking about, I'll give us a little context too, is Barbara's been working in old school fundraising for a long time, helping organizations with their strategic planning, their direct mail, their case for support. And I've been working in the new school for a long time, for the last many, many years. And so we've been talking more and more, her and I together, about like how everybody's living in this world where we're behind our phones, we're behind a computer screen, and that's our way of connecting. But there's a way to really bring together thinking about like not just wow, all of a sudden everything's just digital, but more how do you still combine the right mix of human connection with digital platforms and the way that we connect now to really marry the old school and the new school fundraising. Barbara, you and I have talked a little bit about like, whether or not you're putting on a pair of Chuck Tees or the newest Nikes, like it doesn't really matter. People want to connect with people. And it's really about bringing together the right mix of communication, good segmentation, and we'll get into that so that you're talking to people and channels that they like. And there's a lot of hope that I have, to be honest, even though I know COVID's got us down. Some of us are feeling like fives right now. I think there's a lot of hope in terms of like the innovation that I've seen this weird year drive very quickly that I really think we can build upon.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is the moment where we have to be rethinking all of our fundraising strategies, so that we're using all the assets that we have available to us, all the vehicles, and creating that really strong donor engagement experience.
Yeah. So today we want to talk about how some ideas for how it comes together and how the two work together.
Taylor and Barbara, before we do that, I think what was interesting is when we sent out the discussion email on Tuesday that kind of prompted this conversation, with which many of our audience probably read. I led with the line that, is it direct mail or digital? Because I think when we say old school, new school, sometimes it gets diluted down to do we do direct mail or do we do digital? And the thing I saw you post on LinkedIn, Taylor, when you were promoting this session or this idea, was that it can't be this or concept. It has to be an and I know we're going to get into that, but I also wanted to make sure that we give room for what because old instantly makes it negative and new makes it kind of like shiny in this. But it's really like traditional fundraising kind of tactics and strategies, foundational concepts mixed with this blend in a new world plus new channels. So it's not even this or that. It's still this kind of like evolution. And I'm curious how you just provide the right wording, because I do think these debates happen internally at nonprofits where it's like, oh, should we be a direct mail or should we do digital? And it's like, well, it's not really the right question to be asking. So what language and wording should they be using as they talk about this transition or evolution?
Yeah, I've got some ideas on that. I actually think that's a really good pivot to the next slide and the next like kind of concept, Noah. So Hillary, if you'll go on to the next. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, fundraising is human. It's one of the most human things that we can do. It's one of the most human ways to connect with people. And so when we think about digital or direct mail, I agree, it's not an or conversation. It's not an old school or new shiny object conversation. It's how do we connect with people in the way that they want to be connected with? How do we reach out human to human from our organization to the other humans who want to support our cause, who want to be involved, who want to aspire to do something good for their community and their lives, right? And so I really think about this concept of fundraising being human when we think about, I personally like to donate online, but I'll also pick up the phone and take a phone call if you call me and talk to me about what's going on, right? So like when you think about all of these channels, it's really whether you want to say omni-channel or multi-channel or whatever buzzword you want to choose in the marketing world. It's really about, in my opinion, connecting with people in the ways that's going to resonate the most with them. You guys talk about responsive fundraising all the time. It's about being responsive to how your community has interacted with you and then reaching them in those channels that's going to best connect with them. And Barbara, what would you add?
Yeah, and I would add that it's also not, it's also remembering that there is a human being at the other end of that contribution, right? Whether it's online through texting or online, online contribution or through a check, like I still write checks. So, I'm probably the only one in the world who still writes checks, but like that's the way I generally prefer to make contributions. But it is recognizing that the default can't always be just electronic. So, I've worked with organizations that only ever do e-appeals, and only ever do e-newsletters. And like, they think that investing in direct marketing, and, and printed packages or impact reports or things like that is too expensive. It's not worth the money, blah, blah, blah. And they don't do any phone calls or one-on-one meetings or of any kind. And so it's that sort of understanding, no, we can't do it all, but where can we start to blend, and realizing that there's the people on the other end of that contribution are balancing all the hyper connectivity that we all are, and they probably have a preference, but it doesn't mean that just because they give through one channel, they're not going to be responsive through another channel.
Right.
Yeah. And I think you hit on something I was trying to get to as well, is that like the conversation has to be elevated beyond our like siloed structures internally. Like, oh, we're the annual fund people, we're the digital people, like we're the old school fundraiser, you're the 20 something that's on social media fundraiser.
Yeah.
And we're looking at it from our perspective, our organization's perspective. And I love what you all are saying is like, let's change the conversation. Let's start with like, let's understand our donors and our supporters first, and identify ways and strategies that we can connect with our story. Whether that's a blend or not, that's dependent, right? Like, it's not about the channel or the old or the new. It's about what's going to connect these people. So I really appreciate that kind of reminder.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, the report that you all partnered with the Next Chapter to recently release around multi-channel communications, that those findings blew me away. Like, I always suspected, and I've always talked about, the lift in response rates when you've got a direct mail piece and some sort of electronic communication follow-up. It's usually lifts it by like 30% or something. But then the stats in that report were phenomenal about how much money we're leaving on the table when we say, oh, that person is only an online donor. We're only going to contribute, to communicate with them through that way, or they're only a direct mail donor. We're never going to email them or ask them for the information or call them or whatever. And so I think that's where you never know where you're going to catch people's attention enough to inspire them to act. And we've got to think about this in the multi-channel.
Yeah, and it absolutely has to start with an internal culture shift, I think. And Noah, you started hitting upon this. Departments need to talk to each other about what they're doing. That's how this all starts to blend, is internally within your organization. Reach across the aisle, talk to the digital people, reach across the aisle, talk to the direct mail people, and people who are facilitating different fundraising programs within your organization, no matter what channel. Understand what, the left hand needs to understand what the right hand is doing. And then you can work on really a cohesive plan. I'll also give, when we think about integrating these channels, oftentimes we see some very simple things you can do. Let's say in your direct mail piece, you can send out a short URL code so people who want to give online can go give online. I also think there's a lot of opportunity to get creative with those traditional channels, to create more immersive experiences from them. So what if you took a direct mail piece, put a QR code on it, you picture it with your phone, that opens up a video of a mission moment or something like that. I think there's a lot of room for creativity in marrying the channels together.
Yeah. I would be remiss to not bring up this question from Charlotte. She says, I hear you, but we're a small staff and budget's always an issue. And so we just, like postage, printing, labor, mail. Again, it gets back to this, like, I hear you, I know it works, but like the reality of our budget situation is complicated. So we've maybe opted more for digital. Like, how do we address this internally? I think, how do you justify the cost? This becomes a big topic of conversation for smaller orgs.
So I would say definitely having some of that's awareness building internally. So, managing up to the decision makers within the organization who are controlling the budget, who are determining the budget. It's also educating the boards because they ultimately have sign off on the budget, or usually do. So it's using reports and the data that we have, like the one I just mentioned, you guys did with Next After, that says we're leaving money on the table if we aren't investing in some sort of print communication. We know for the last 20 years, everyone's been saying direct mail is going to be dead, and it is more alive than ever. So even if it doesn't have to be super expensive, but even if you say we're going to carve out, $5,000 to do a couple print pieces, maybe you can work with a print house to get some sort of online, some sort of in-kind contribution, or maybe you can get that sponsored by, a corporation or something. But start small, do it. This doesn't have to be, and we'll talk about this in a couple slides, but like, it doesn't have to be the whole kit and caboodle, but it could be doing, a couple of pieces that are print, testing it to see responsiveness. And then, adding on because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you start to invest in these ways of communicating with donors, through print and other platforms, getting the technology capability in place, you will start to raise more money, and then you'll have more resources to be able to invest. But if you keep holding yourself back, especially in fundraising, you're going to remain stuck.
Yeah. The one thing we've seen too is that a lot of times direct mail is associated with, hey, we're going to mail 10,000 people a letter and pray that 3 to 5% of them give us money. And that's how we're running ROI on direct mail. One thing we talk about in the responsive fundraising framework is like segmentation and choosing who and then when and what to send people can be extremely valuable to increase response rates, because instead of saying I'm going to mail 10,000 people and hope that someone responds this month in this moment, how can you even think about direct mail or any fundraising as a dynamic function where when is the right time to send out a mail? Like, like I just donated to 6 or 7 organizations on Giving Tuesday. Like, I would hope some of those mail me. I'm really curious before year ends. Like, I'm a perfect new donor for them. Like, you should mail me and get my attention. Like, you have momentum. Now, if you mailed me 2 months ago as a prospect, I would have probably ignored your mailing. And it's like, it's that balance of getting smart about how you leverage different channels as well. But I know we have lots more slides, so we'll let you continue to press forward.
Cool. Good question, though. I mean, that's a big question. All right, so let's get into the right mix, right? Like what are all the pieces that work together in terms of like the stages of building the right approach? And Barbara and I, as we've been talking more about this, like how to connect your humans at your organization with more humans who can support you, is whether you're doing digital channels, direct mail channels, picking up the phone, all of these steps in the process are relevant. So we'll get started with the fact that communication, when we talk about that, before you do anything, before you mail anything, whether in an email or put up a social post or send something in the mail, you've got to first identify, what are you saying about your organization, the impact you have, and why it matters to the person on the other side of that piece of information that they're getting. That communication is really important to have a lot of clarity in your message, your brand, your case for support, and why it really matters to the other person who is receiving that. Barbara, what would you add to that?
Yeah, and this is where the message platform, using kind of marketing language, communications and marketing language, and your case for support using fundraising language, they should be integrated or almost the same. So they're asking questions around, why is this issue important and urgent? Why is my support needed now more than ever? Why am I important to you as an organization, as a donor to you as an organization? So this has to be threading that needle, if you would, or sort of creating that story arc around what's the problem, what's the solution, how can I help, and bridge that gap between the problem and the solution. And so and I think, what comes out of that strategic plan, which is the overall direction of your organization, the message platform, which are the, key messages and the proof points, that then converts into your case, which then can be repopulated and repurposed through all of the online and offline channels.
Yeah, absolutely. So once you have that really nailed down, really clear, and it is something that helps the person receiving the message really understand again how they are a part of making the impact.
Mhm.
That's when you can then figure out, okay, we've got our messaging down, we have clarity in what we're saying. Now we have to determine where we want to interact with people, and that's where the mix comes in of social media and email marketing and direct mail marketing and phone calls and major donor outreach. All of those channels, that's where segmentation, I think, Noah, you mentioned that, comes into play to start figuring out, okay, who do we want to kind of talk to about what and in where. And then I think it's also important to then go to the next step once you figure out where you're trying to interact with people. And I always recommend not to bite off too many different channels all at once. Like, if you have never tried Facebook fundraising, try that one first before you get into like, well, should I do Instagram or should I do this, right? And then figure out how these systems integrate, right? And again, that also kind of brings in that internal culture of integration amongst your departments.
Mhm.
Can I make a quick comment on the channel trying?
Mhm.
I think sometimes too, like
Yeah,
if you're not doing like even just like phone call, mail, and email, right? Like
Yeah.
it doesn't even
Yeah.
matter what the other channels are. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes that too, like we forget that like just a mix of, we saw in our research report, I think Sarah Dyer from Buckner International is actually on the call, who we highlighted in the report, but they just did like a mix of mail, email, text, and phone call, like just the 4 core channels, and saw, are seeing initial results and increases there. So
Yeah.
this isn't a comment, like it doesn't always jump to the net new channels. It's like, do the foundational ones right. Like
Yeah.
we all use those 4 channels. Like every single one of your donors uses those 4 channels nowadays. So let's get that right.
Yeah, and
Totally.
we've moved away from using even the phone. I mean, like, when I started fundraising in the dark ages, that's all we had was the phone and mail. So now I'm totally dating myself, but that was the reality, right? We had phone, mail, and in person, and then of course events. So I think we've moved away as we have become more digitized in our thinking and in our existence from using phones, and we know that even just the way the hearing of somebody's voice and having, even if we end up just leaving a voicemail, that the power of the sound of the voice does something to our brains, which changes us and which inspires us to be more prone to action. So even if it's a voicemail, in which I've worked with plenty of clients when they're like, listen, all we're going to get are voicemails. Why do I have to make these calls? And I say, because you're reaching out personally and you are saying, well, you matter to us. I want to just tell you thank you. And that usually then has a result in lifts in upgrades of giving and frequency of giving and reactivations for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if that person doesn't call back, they might hear that and it might go prompt them to do something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
I will say too, like that you talk about human to human, like
Yeah.
you talk about voice, like even just simple things. Like I got a text after I gave to an organization on Giving Tuesday that said, "Hi Noah, this is Drew at organization. Thank you so much for making this the biggest year ever." And just the fact that now I know, like, organization, Drew works at this organization.
Yeah.
He's emailing me. This is an auto-generated text. I know that.
Yeah.
I know how technology works.
Yeah.
But now I know Drew, I know the organization, and now I know that Drew called me out. Like something as simple as that. And it's like a, 1-sentence text message. And now I'm
Yeah.
already talking about it. Like those
Yeah.
are the things that matter in a human to human world.
Totally. Especially when people are feeling disconnected this year from COVID. That's why I think this is the time to get on that kind of an approach right now, to help people feel the connection. I think there was a good question that came in.
Was
Yeah, it was about, should they run one campaign throughout the year, or should they run multiple campaigns throughout the year, or would a yearly campaign prove to be more simpler and more effective ask? So kind of is it multi-campaign or one campaign that it runs through the year?
I would say multiple times. You've got to be asking at least 3 or 4 times a year, so at least once a quarter. But it's got to be in that cycle of asking, thanking, making sure that's a prompt, meaningful thank you. At some point, kind of doing a little impact update, and then asking again. If you leave it only to one time a year, usually in the Q4 of the calendar year, you're setting yourself up for so much pressure, unnecessary pressure, because you're like, gosh, are we going to hit it? Are we going to hit our goals? What's happening? Are we, or how much of a shortfall might we face? If the timing of those gifts, the receipt of gifts come in after, how much are you, how much of that or that gap are you going to be facing? So you want donors to get in that regular cycle of, making a couple of gifts a year to you. They may choose to only make one a year, and that's fine. But as you get more, as you can lean into your technology a little bit more, you'll be able to see what are the trends. When do some of these donors typically give? And you may even ask them, when will you typically give to us? Can we ask you multiple times, or do you only want us to, to solicit you, in November or December or whenever?
Yeah. And that's part of the analysis and the segmentation piece of this too, is like understanding what people want, understanding patterns of behavior and patterns of giving, and then segmenting your audiences and speaking to them in an appropriate way that feels responsive to them. I would agree and second that. I'm a big believer in the idea that it's 1,000 baby steps to reach your goal. And if you save everything till Giving Tuesday and the end of the year and that whole time frame, or one campaign, then you are opening yourself up to risk, to a lot of pressure, stress, people getting burnt out and not reaching your goal. So I think you have to think about this holistic approach as 1,000 baby steps to get to the end goal, whatever that is at the end of the year, or just in the grand scheme of things.
And it's a constant cycle of testing and iterating too. So, in our sector, we have a real fear of risk. We have a fear of failure because it could cost money, right? It might be money that our organization needed to do something else. And if it didn't work, if it didn't hit, its ROI, well, I told you that was a waste of money kind of thing. And the reality is you've got to figure out, like, if you start doing print pieces and sending them out and you're not getting those returns, you might want to think about changing the time of year. You may want to change the segmentation. You may want to think about adding some other channel, whether it's a phone, whether it's digital, whatever it might be, and start to iterate that way and figure out why it's not, like, learn from why it didn't work. But don't just say, well, we mailed once and nobody replied, or we got very few gifts. That's not the solution. It's figuring out. We know we've got so much data and research that shows us what are successful fundraising practices, both on and offline. So let's continue to draw on that and build that into our own organization's outreach.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Taylor and Barbara, we could have this conversation for multiple hours.
I was about to say, I think we have a few minutes left.
In today's conversation, there was a bunch of good questions about who should make phone calls. I appreciate the audience actually chiming in on that. Anybody can make a phone call. Someone said board members were making phone calls and donors were blown away that a board member would give them a call. Thinking we have 2 minutes and we have 28 days left of the year. Maybe what's like the one thing practically that you might just remind our audience of, because a lot of this is reminding them of what fundraising really is, that they should take away from today's conversation. Barbara, do you want to start?
Yeah, so in the next 28 days, you want to be running those reports, finding out who are your inactive, like who are the ones who gave last year but not yet this year. Again, depending on whether it's fiscal or calendar, but I would right now be thinking about calendar year comparisons. And then sort of scale and segmenting who were the ones who your board. And I will say there's definitely research that shows that board members calls way more heavily on upgrades, renewals of gifts than even staff. So if you can but that doesn't mean don't have staff calls. So if you can segment those top donors and do personal calls, I would even say personal notes, like a quick personal handwritten note, pop it in the mail. That carries a lot of weight too. So definitely, and texting. So if you've got the text messaging capability, I would say maybe emails, but everyone's emails are just flooded. So I focus on what are those gifts that you have to absolutely close again this year. You got to renew. So we've got to maintain our focus on donor retention.
Yeah,
Taylor, what would you add?
I would add, I mean, something just kind of at a very high level. This is a recommendation I often make to people. I want you to take a step back from your final closing statements of the year in terms of your email campaign and all of that. I know that your direct mail is probably set and done, but your emails and your socials, if you could still iterate those, take a look at those and ask yourself, if I didn't work at my organization and I was receiving this, would I be compelled to give? And if the answer is no, rethink it. You still have time to rethink it. I want you to really think about making sure that your message and your case for, impact and support is very, very clear in what you're asking people to do, how they are a part of it, and why it matters that they are a part of it. If you focus on them as the hero, I know people say that all the time and it might sound annoying, but it's really true and it really works. So take a step back and read it from a different perspective other than yourself, and ask yourself that question and make tweaks if you need to.
Well, Taylor, Barbara, it's always been great. And Hillary, I believe there's quick slides. If you guys want to get in touch with Barbara or Taylor, sorry, Barbara and Taylor, you can reach out to Barbara at whillconsulting.com or email her, and then Taylor at Firefly Partners. And Taylor dropped her email address in the chat too, Taylor at fireflypartners.com. We're so grateful, Taylor and Barbara, for your insights. I know this was like a shotgun delivery and conversation, but I do think this just is a general reminder, if you walk away with nothing else, fundraising is human, the human. We need to remember that. Let's start there and then work backwards to channel and online, old, offline, new, old.
Sure.
So thank you for the reminders, Taylor and Barbara. Hillary, thank you so much. And I'll see everybody next week for another conversation on the Responsive Weekly. Thanks, everyone.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Have a good day.
Bye.